And we can pray, which I'm going to do. But just briefly, I'm going to, our speaker this morning, Chrissie Chapman, went to Burundi in the 90s thinking she was going to be a midwife. If you know anything about the 90s and the history that she's lived through, this woman knows a few things about stress and the power of God. I'm not going to tell you any more about it. I'm just going to say a prayer and invite Chrissie, our guest, up to speak to us this morning. I can't wait to hear from you, Chrissie. But first, Lord, who is like you? Enthroned on high, you stoop down to look at the heavens and the earth. You raise the poor from the dust. You lift the needy from the ash heap. Lord, whom have we in heaven but you? And earth has nothing we desire besides you. Lord, come and be our peace. Good Shepherd, minister to your people. And bless our speaker this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Chrissie, we welcome you.
Good morning. At the beginning of last year, 2015, the Lord impressed on me, after many, many years, over 20 years in fact, of different people encouraging me, asking me, pressing me to write a book about some of the stories, some of the miracles, some of the things that God has allowed me to be a part of and to see over the last 26 years. And it was at the beginning of last year that I sat down and all of a sudden felt this is the time that I actually need to put pen to paper and to start to write down some of the things that I've had the privilege of being a part of, some of the things that the Lord has allowed me to see. I'm aware of the fact this morning, with some envy in my heart, as I have glanced around here and seen so many, a sea of faces of young people here at that time in your lives when you're making career choices and life choices. And it seems like 5 minutes ago that I was in that place myself of making career choices and life choices. And here I am, all of a sudden, almost 65 years old, and so much of my life, so much further on. But at the same time, I say to you this morning that one of the things that I have learned over all of these years, especially having spent 26 years in what is now the poorest country in the world, that people can live without food for a long time, and people can live without water for quite a few days, but you can't live without hope. We cannot live without hope. And so I want to share with you in the few minutes that we've got this morning some of the things that I've seen, some of the things that I've been a part of, something of the faithfulness of God, which has given me hope as I have met and rubbed shoulders with people in Africa who themselves have walked through more than anything that I could ever have read about in a book, or that I could have ever learned about in a mission training school. But life itself has been their training ground. And as I've met men and women whose God sometimes seems to have been so much bigger than the God that I have known, the God who has been clouded with material things, being privileged to have been born into a first world country. But as I sat at the beginning of last year and started to write down, my mind went back to 26 years ago on the 7th of September 1990, when God made a way for me to be able to go to Burundi, which is a small heart-shaped country called the Heart of Africa, right in the middle of East Africa. It used to all be part of Rwanda at one time before it gained its independence. Its bordering countries are Tanzania and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The total population is just over 10 million people. And as I arrived in Burundi, having been invited to go and open a maternity clinic and dispensary to pursue my career choice of over 40 years ago, to be a midwife and a nurse, I thought this was what God had called me into. This was my plan, to go to Burundi to open a maternity clinic and a dispensary. After meeting the Lord, after being introduced to Jesus and giving my life to him 40 years ago, and standing and saying, Lord, I want my life to make a difference. I don't really know what that means, but deep down inside of me, I felt there had to be more to life than going into a hospital every day. Even though it was a privilege to be a part of bringing new life into the world and being a part of that, there was something inside of me that I knew from being a young child, that I wanted my life in some way to make a difference. And I remember when I gave my life to Jesus, saying, I want my life to make a difference. And the journey that God took me on, to the point where I took a year out to go to a mission training school to seek the Lord about my future. And it was there that I met some people who introduced me to the little country of Burundi that I'd never heard of, and so many people have never heard of. Such a small nation, a third world nation in the middle of Africa. What is Burundi? Where is Burundi? Burundi, right at this moment, the poorest country in the world and in a state of civil unrest and civil war. And yet I guarantee that the majority of you here have never heard of it. But this morning, I want to tell you that God is at work in that country as well. And it's been a privilege to be a part of that. And as I sat with my pen on paper, my mind went back to arriving on that mountain, to opening that maternity clinic, thinking that I was going to be there for 2 or 3 years to train up a local staff, to be able to deliver live babies to live mothers in an area where the catchment area was 72,000 people and no medical facilities near there. It was overwhelming, coming from a busy maternity hospital in London where if something goes wrong, you press a red panic button and all the doctors come running, to landing on top of a mountain with no running water and no electricity. But God was there, and that was where I learned to pray. The day after I arrived in the country, my plans already seemed to change as a young girl came to me with a 16-month-old baby strapped on her back and said, "Can you give me a job?" I felt sorry for her and the child, so I gave her a job. Long story short, she abandoned that child a few months later. And I finished up adopting that little girl. Her name's Lydia. She's now 28 years old. She's my daughter. She lives in Rwanda, and I have a grandson. He's a year old. A year later, I had a dream. I woke up early one morning feeling like I was holding a baby, and it was so real I could feel the breath of this child on my neck. And I knew that God was going to give me a son. I didn't have a husband. I knew I wasn't physically going to give birth to this boy, but I knew I was going to have a boy, and his name was going to be Benjamin. So convinced was I that this dream was from the Lord that I contacted a friend of mine who lived in the city centre and said, if anybody leaves a baby boy on your doorstep, he's mine, and his name's Benjamin. 2 weeks later, she drove up the mountain with twin girls. And she said, I didn't get a boy. I don't know if your dream was wrong, but I've got twin girls here. Can you help? And I thought, help. Here I had a little girl who was 3 at this time, Lydia, and now these twin girls came along, 6 weeks old. Father had died before they were born. Mother died a few days after delivery, and Aunt had looked after them. I thought, well, I can't let them die. So I took them in. A couple of weeks after they came, it became apparent that they were both very sick. Very long story short, we finished up in the hospital. They were diagnosed with AIDS. Both parents seemingly had not died of malaria. They died of AIDS. The twin sister, I call them Deborah and Hannah. The twin sister, Deborah, the more fragile one, died in my arms when she was 4 months old. Hannah continued not to thrive, and I went through months of real anguish and quite upset with the Lord in many ways. Here I was, bringing new life, delivering new babies, up at this clinic, everybody thrilled, mothers going home with live babies, and yet this baby that I felt the Lord had given to me to care for, with life ebbing out of her. And one night, my busiest night ever in the clinic, I was on my own and I delivered 9 babies over the course of the night. And I walked home to my small mud house at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I picked up Hannah, and I fell asleep in the chair with Hannah on my shoulder, Lydia asleep in bed. And I woke up a couple of hours later, and the sun was coming up through the window. And Hannah stirred, and there was a tremendous peace in the room. I had put on a tape with a song that was playing called God Will Make a Way Where There Seems to Be No Way. And as I sat that morning, it was like the Son of Righteousness rose with healing in his wings and a tremendous peace in the room. And I made some milk and thought I'll just try and give some milk to this baby before I get ready and go back to work again. I was tired, I was weary, I was in tears, and at that point in time I was ready to pack my bags and go back to England. But here I was, feeling trapped with a 3-year-old and a very sick baby. But that morning, for the first time ever, Hannah drank her milk and she wasn't sick. And the next day, she drank her milk and she wasn't sick. And she started to eat and she started to thrive. And at 12 months old, I took her back to the hospital and I had her blood tested again. HIV negative. Hannah's my daughter. She's going to be 24 years old this Christmas. She just graduated with a history degree in a university in London. She will go back to university to start a law conversion year in January. The desire of her heart to give back in some way, that her life will make a difference for the life that God has given her. She wants to work with something like Lawyers Without Borders. She has a heart to work in humanitarian aid, maybe to work with children being trafficked in Burundi. I woke up one morning in October to the sound of silence in Burundi. Silence because in Africa everybody has a radio and everybody has a goat and everybody has a chicken that cock-a-doodle-doos at 4 o'clock in the morning. But we woke up in October 1993 And there was silence. There was no radio, no chicken, no goat. And news filtered through very, very quickly that there had been a military coup in Burundi. And over a period of the next week, over 300,000 people were killed in a genocide. And you know, the world never heard about it because it's just Burundi. It's just 10 million people. Who knows about Burundi? Who cares about Burundi? It was a few months later, in April 1994, that the knock-on effect and the genocide happened in Rwanda. And that became news, big news, because over 1 million people were killed. But here we were, stranded on a mountain, in the middle of a genocide, which led to a civil war which lasted for no less than 13 years. I managed to get my 2 children and a whole team evacuated from the mountain. I was stranded there for a week, and I don't have time this morning to tell you everything that happened, but the title of the book that I wrote, as I catalogued and remembered everything that happened the night the angels came. The angels did come one night, and they surrounded us, and they protected us, and I saw them, and we got off that mountain. God made a way for us to get off that mountain, and I made my way down to the city centre. And all of a sudden, all my plans for what I thought was to go and deliver babies, now I had 2 children of my own. Now the maternity clinic was long in the distance. Now I was in the middle of third world Africa, in the middle of a war, totally unprepared, totally unequipped, totally unqualified for anything that I thought I was going to face. So I thought, well, the only thing I can do is do what my hands find to do. So I set off to start to work in the camps for the displaced, thousands of them in empty spaces. And then one day I got a call from the pastor at the church, and he said, there's a lady in the hospital and she's got a baby boy, and the mother died and the father's in the camp, and can you take him? So I said, yeah, bring him. So here comes the father holding this baby boy, and he brings him in, and the minute I picked him up and held him, I knew that he was Benjamin. And I looked at his father, and he said to me, will you take my child that he can live? And I said, can I call him Benjamin? And he said, funnily enough, that's his name. Benjamin's here with me this morning. He's 23 this year, in just a few weeks' time. He's also just graduated from a university in London. He's pursuing his passion in music and songwriting with a heart to introduce Jesus into the world of secular music. God bless him. I don't know how he's going to do it, but he has a dream and he has a passion. And I look at him and I think, God made a way for him, and he's going to make a way. And as I look at you, I can't see many of your faces because it's dark in here this morning, but I know you're there because I can see the shape of your heads. What I can tell you is that if you will say to God, I want my life to make a difference, he will make sure your life makes a difference. In the middle of your career choices, in the middle of your life choices, he wants to give you hope. And what he wants to do in you, he wants to do through you, because that's the way that God works. I started to work in the camps. Here I was with 3 children at home, taking porridge to feed children in the camps. And I went in one day and found a man who had finished feeding all these children with porridge, and there was an old man sitting in the dirt with an empty cup. And he seemed to be praying, and I said to my friend, I need to go and ask this man his story. And he told me he was 83. All 7 of his children had been killed. It had taken him 5 days to walk down to that camp, and all he had was what he stood up in. And I took his cup and I scraped the bottom of my porridge barrel and gave him a cup of porridge. And he looked at me and he said, "Madam Missionary, I never realized that Jesus was all I needed until Jesus was all I'd got." And I realized at that moment that his God was so much bigger than my God. That somehow he had found a God to fix his eyes on, that he realized that we only have one crack at life. There's no rehearsal to life, is there? This is it. 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 or more years. This is it. And he had realized at this age that he was just passing through, and his family was just passing through, and they were in a better place. And at some point in the very near future, he was going to go and he was going to be with them. And his faith and the joy in his heart mixed with the grief was something that changed my life. And I will never be the same again because of that man's faith. And it provoked me to go deeper into Jesus as I went into that camp every day, and then one day found a baby on a rubbish dump and took her home. And 5 days later, I had 17 babies under 3 months old on beanbags on my sitting room floor. Within a few months, I'd got 54 children. My claim to fame is I'm single, I have no husband, I've got 54 children, all with different fathers. This is what a missionary looks like. Any volunteers? Time has almost gone. Right now, all of those babies, they're young men and women. My youngest is 15. The oldest is 27. They're all at that stage now of making career choices. We've got 2 here in Santa Barbara City College. I've got 2 in Oklahoma Christian University. One of them, a young girl called Grace. I got her when she was 5 days old. She was found flushed down a public toilet. Just hours old. I got her when she was 5 days old out of the hospital. The only thing that stopped her from going down the U-bend was her chin got short in her got caught on her shoulder. She's studying journalism. One day she'll write her own story in her own book. But God is faithful. Right now, as we are getting ready to get as many of these young people as we can out of the country into other universities and further education, Burundi has got big political problems at this moment in time. I had no idea when I wrote this book at the beginning of last year that within 2 months of starting to write it, once again history was going to repeat itself, when in April there was another attempted military coup, and the country has been in turmoil since then. I'm going back to Burundi on the 10th of December. I've got another 2 weeks here and a few days in England before I go back. It wouldn't surprise me that any day in the weeks that lie ahead, the time will come once again when I'll wake up one morning and there'll be a baby on my doorstep. My worker will come in and say, "There's a baby on the doorstep." Because people don't have food. We're the poorest country in the world, and a mother would rather live with a broken heart of not having her baby with her than sit with a broken heart nursing a dead baby. So she'll find a very strange old white missionary who has a history for taking in babies, and she'll wrap him up or her up, and she'll leave him in a basket at my doorstep. It's happened over and over again, and we're going through that season of life again when we're going through much trouble. But this I can tell you, the same God that has given us wisdom, the same God that has given us strength, the same God that has provided for us and protected us and been faithful to us for all of these years doesn't change. There's a verse in the Bible that says, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And because he is great, I'm going to be great. And because he is great, if you will accept Jesus Christ as your Lord, you can be great. And if you will stand and be willing to say, God, I want to be great. I want my life to make a difference. God will do that. He will take your life. He will give you wisdom. He will help you with your career choices. And he will help you that your life too may make a difference. God bless you, and I encourage you today to make that choice and to say, Lord, come into my life. I want my life to make a difference for you. If you're interested in reading some of the miracles and stories, we have some books at the back there. God bless you. I'll invite Ben.